What we're trying to do is clear up some of the confusion that you might come across occasionally when viewing some of these plans that you get. Either you buy them or you get them free in the magazine, to clear up the confusion of how the drawing is interpreted. And even in cases of the bill of materials, where they're describing the various stock lengths you got to use and whatever else like that. That falls under the category sometimes of working drawings. And basically that's what I do. I'll make my drawing of a particular piece of furniture that I'm making or designing, and then I'll balloon every little piece that makes up this thing and separate them. Then I'm able to do a detailed drawing of that specific part, whether it be a stile or a rail or whatever. I detail it so I know what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, and it establishes a process for me on how I make the unit. Now, we all work differently. When I first started, having retired from engineering, I immediately brought home with me a small CAD program, TurboCAD. And I started using TurboCAD and AutoCAD to do that because I already had some experience. But I found myself time and time again saying, this is a bloody step stool. What do I want to do? A CAD drawing for a step stool. So invariably I'd go back to graph paper, or else I'd go on my drafting board. I have a drafting machine. I still use it. I love it. But then I'd do freehand drawings, or I'd do real scale drawings to get to where I wanted to go.
Gabe mentioned drafting machines. Rich mentioned it. What are they? The basic thing is, it's almost the way I've seen it, drafting is the same thing as cabinet making. You need a straight line as a reference to start with. You can't have a piece of wood unless you joint it and you know it's a reference. A T-square, a parallel, drafting machine all exist to make a series of parallel straight lines and then right angles in addition to them. Frankly, all through architecture school, I used a piece of plywood with linoleum on it because it was free and I couldn't afford to get anything more than that. The whole point of any of this is a parallel is basically, it's a ruler held by cables, and I don't have a sketch of that here, is really the best. That's what architects liked for years until CAD came along, because it was a free-floating thing. I tend not to use that kind of thing anymore, only because I don't have room to keep a drawing board and all of that. A T-square, you can get a metal one at Home Depot. It doesn't really matter. The one thing that happens is when this is held to a firm edge, and you take a drafting triangle, and a drafting triangle is a pretty cheap thing. It's a couple of dollars, and anytime you look in fine woodworking and they talk about reference sources, Kurt's triangle, in fact, these things are really accurate. They're incredibly accurate. You could drop them. They pass the drop test. They don't go out of whack. And it seems like every magazine in fine woodworking when they talk about how to check the reference of your square, they say hold two squares up against each other, or they always say, or use one of these. These are really accurate. So when you're holding this to this, you know that you're getting right angles and straight. If you're a right-hander, you hold it here and you just draw lines. It's literally that simple. There's no mystery to this. Another question I know Bill Byrne had asked, was we'd mentioned about architect scales. And there's basically the whole idea of when you draw, whether it's engineers, architects, or metric, is very rarely do you draw full size. I mean, you can. I mean, if you're doing a 20-foot long cabinet or an 8-foot long piece or something, it won't fit on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, or in my case, a 3 by 5 index card. Don't ask. When you're dealing with lines and drawings, like a lot of different lines you need. Straight line, standard line, it's what it is. This darker line is an outline. That's a technique. It's something, well, you're an engineer too. Engineers tended to do that more when you're looking at a top plan and an elevation and the like. How do you make your lines? If they're drafted, if they're straight like that, well, it's a sharp point and you're holding it down and it's fine. If you're working freehand, there are several ways to do. A lot of people go with a scratchy line. I was taught in school, never ever use a scratchy line. For no other reason, it takes away the confidence in your doing a line, because these were all done freehand. I didn't use guidelines, I didn't measure them or anything, because after a while, It's incredibly easy. It's a good technique because, you know, you don't have time to draft. Sometimes you have time to sketch. Or you see people either marking on sheetrock or a piece of plywood. It's all done freehand. Same thing. Just hold the pencil, and you wonder, the whole key to the entire thing with freehand drawing is, until you get used to it, is keeping your wrist straight and just working that way or working that way. The whole thing is in the elbow moving, not the wrist. If it's near an edge of a drawing, it's almost as though if you've learned how to use a jointer fence, when you're running things through a jointer, everyone but Mike, when I remember when I've seen him work, is you hook your pinky over the fence and you push. That way that hand never gets near the blade. Same thing, you hook your pinky over the edge of a plywood board or something and you go straight down, and that line will probably be as straight as you need to be unless it needs to be drafted. Oh, sweetheart, I swear to God, I can never get you out of the house without your tie being just right.
Okay. Okay. A lot of times I'll just use the back of old blueprints. As you can see, that's just something that I did. If I need to draw something big, that's what I'll use. You can get tracing paper, pad like this. It's just art paper. You go down to Staples, wherever, and it's translucent. You can, if you need to make a copy of it, you can. Light will pass through it. But that's basically what I use. And most of the time, now what I do is I just use an 8.5 by 11 pad. And I'll do exactly what you were saying, Gabe, is I'll just make a sketch of something and then detail a specific joint or a detail to get exact measurements. And usually I'll draw that to scale. I was planning a pergola for my backyard. Okay. Does that come? Is that okay? So it's a three-dimensional sketch. As a detail, I've drawn up, because I have to make a couple mortise and tenon joints. I've done that. Okay. Pull back a little bit. All right, that's just to get exact measurements. I made a planter box. That's just a sketch that I did for it. All right, it's all on 8.5 by 11. Freehand with a triangle. I just use a triangle as a straight edge. This I did for my neighbors last summer. I built them a pergola over their hot tub. And this was, I don't know if that's going to come out. Okay, but I just needed to figure out where, there's no hardware in this. It's all cedar with wooden pegs holding the whole thing together, and it's about 24 feet long. Made two of these, and it's about 8 feet high. And it's a pergola. Okay, and these are the two arches that I made to do that. And just something about lines and drawing. Somebody asked the question before, what pencils to use. Most of the time, when I'm doing a sketch, I'll just use triangles. You can get your 90 degree just by doing that. Okay, you got a straight edge, you got a 90 degree, 45s, 30, 60, 90s. Usually what I'll do is I'll mark out everything and I'll use a blue pencil. You do it lightly. It's easy to erase. If you have to make something fit, you make it all in blue first. Then when you have all your dimensions set and you're pretty confident about things and it looks like it's going to fit, then you can use a regular pencil. Most of the time what I do is I use mechanical pencils. You know, just like a 0.5 millimeter, a 0.7, and a 0.9 for 3 different weights. And if I really want a dark line of something, then I'll use a pen or a marker or something like that. But the object is keep the pencil point sharp so that your lines sharpen often, and you can just use a regular pencil. There are different grades even of wooden pencils, but just keep them sharp and your line weights will be just fine. So when you're drawing with the pencil, just turn the pencil. It keeps the point sharp as you're going. It's very easy. You just roll the pencil in your fingers as you go along.
There's another thing, a French curve. You've seen them, those big long plastic things or short plastic things. is the way you work is, let's assume you have an idea for a curve you want to work. In this case, let's assume it's this kind of almost question mark shape. You establish a series of dots. However close together you want depends upon the curve, how accurate you want it to be, and what kind of set of French curves you have. So after you have your dots, you take that plastic French curve and you put it down, and you connect with any part of it as many dots as you can. Say in this curve, it connects 3 dots. You take a line with a pencil, you connect 2 of them. The key with a French curve to give you a very smooth line all the way through is leave the last dot off. So then the next time, so this is the first curve, you now connect everything else you need connected. 1, 2, 3, 4, everything but the last line off. By the time you're done, I don't know why, there's probably a mathematical reason why it works, but it works. You actually get a smooth curve. Whether you're going to use that for a template, whether that's your final piece, it works. One thing I've seen with blueprints, I mean, same as Gabe, the reason we use vellum is you could see through it. It can hold up to a lot of erasing. I erase a lot. And it can hold up to tape, and then it's got to go to a blueprint machine. They're very hot. The ammonia smell that is the developers there, the paper's got to be tough. It's got to be strong to take that kind of abuse. Then they get rolled up, they get shipped everywhere. When it's just us doing it, it doesn't take that kind of beating. And a place like Kinko's has kind of changed the way things get reproduced. There are giant Xerox machines now. The difference is they alter the scale of the drawings with the heat. So if you're drawing something, say exactly 24 inches, you run it through those giant Xerox machines, what you come out will not be 24 inches. It may not be exactly straight either. Just realize that. Blueprints keep the scale right, and they keep the proportions right, and they keep the lines straight. You'll get distortions with copies.
Gadget for drawing parallel lines. For those of you
Oh, that roller thing. My son has that. It's great. He
Don't want to handle a
loves
whole bunch of triangles at the same time. Is this little gadget right here? All it does is it's rollers. You can actually measure the distance that you
My
just
10-year-old
place the
uses that.
lines, yeah.
Isn't it great? It's so
I
cute.
don't know how many of you have this, but it's pretty handy, especially if you're working off your workbench or a desk or something like that. There you are.
And if you have a 10-year-old who has to do a timeline project and you got to do a lot of them for him, they work right there too. There's one other point that came up, I think, and this whole thing came out of someone asking a question on the forum, which is why it's great to ask questions on the forum, because things grow out of it, was how to sketch and draw and the like. And Kurt showed, I think one of yours was an isometric of that pergola, right?
Yes.
So from that, I don't know if you want to segue into what's an isometric and a perspective and the like. And Gabe and I, you know, we're talking one time when we met about this, and this comes into how you design. And Gabe had mentioned, for instance, you work in 3 lines. The height of the table, and call it 30 inches. You scale that off. That's the only thing you could really measure, that height, because everything else tapers. Where do the vanishing points go? You have to play with that. That's can't be taught. You have to practice it. So now you have a point here, because what you've done is you have a horizon from your eye.
That sounds like a golden rule, 1.62.
Copying from a picture.
Step, I'm showing here, maybe this is the few times I scale off a drawing is the way I scale off a perspective. And even then you fudge and fake, because the whole idea is to make it look right, not to be right. Because the only reason you're doing any kind of drawing is to see how it's going to look. If you're going to sit there and draft it the way Gabe and Kurt showed with the drawings and the views, that has to be exact. This doesn't. This is for a client to give them an idea. This is for you to give an idea. And I say now make corrections, because even though with that eyeballing technique, it looks right, it's not right. Because you know darn well if it's a 30 by 60 table, the legs wouldn't be that long in relation to it. You erase. Yeah, I'm good at, yeah. Or you basically tell everyone, no, you've redesigned it because the table is the wrong proportion and you need it right. See, at one point it's kind of like an isometric. All these are vertical, and then they vanish back. I don't have much use for it myself, because in the end, it's good for architectural renderings when you're showing a marina with the dock and it's dramatic.
What I do when and I do this totally freehand, I draw Those 3 lines. And that establishes my basis for a perspective drawing at my own scale. Because if I'm thinking about a table, and I'm going to be drawing a lot of parallel lines, and I hope they come out parallel. See, that one didn't come out parallel. That could be a tabletop. You could have an apron. You'd have a leg. Because this would be a parallel line also. So I can have a parallel line here. And if I go parallel in here, there's the base of that other leg. And I develop drawings just based on that. Again, with those 3 lines, I can draw a chair, and even give that chair some body. And all I'm using is those basic lines of just running parallel lines, and I can get a 3-dimensional drawing out of that.
The bottom of these legs has to be parallel to this line. So again, you do the same thing. You just slide this down to be parallel to that. And that's where I was saying you use a blue pencil. You draw your blue line there, and you use that as a mark, and then when you're drawing your defined lines, your final lines, you draw to that blue line.
What I was trying to show before, if you go on the website and you get into the gallery, into our gallery, you'll see this piece here. And there is a detailed drawing. There's a detail assembly. What I did was pull out the side of the cabinet, and I show some of the detail as to how I want to construct it. And you notice I put biscuits there, and I show some mortise and tenon work, and I show some dotted lines. The dotted lines represents the dado that's going to hold the panel. Over here I show either a stile or a rail or whatever, but I also show the tenons. And you can also see the changes I've made to it as a result of it. But then there's all my dimensions. I can sit down and make 2 or 20 or 30 of those, or make this one now and make the other one later, because I have the numbers. And that's a freehand drawing. That is not to scale. None of these drawings is to scale now. Then over here, you can see where I started pulling various parts away. There's the drawer, the upper drawer, the bay, so on and so forth. In here, I have the material. And here I have what the material might cost. And here I have the labor. These are working drawings. That one will shift again. Those little detailed sketches are working drawings. And that's the important thing, because if you make a good scale drawing, even to 1/8 or 1/4 inch to the scale, if you make a good scale drawing, you can actually use your drawing to measure the item. A lot of the problems with drawing, with understanding drawings, is visualization. Visualizing a 2-dimensional drawing into a 3-dimensional shape. Once you get past that hurdle, no matter what you put on paper, you'll see it 3-dimensional. It works out better. That's usually the biggest hurdle to get over. Being able to visualize a 3-dimensional object in a 2-dimensional drawing. No, thank you.